If your garden is looking a little rough right now, you are not alone. Spring can be an incredibly challenging time of year for the southeastern United States, Florida, and the coast. But it's important to note that this is a typical cycle, and it is meant to be hot and dry this time of year. But this year we're pushing it even a little further into extreme drought territory, and that does change the game a bit. I think it's important to note that we can work with these conditions and still have a thriving, bountiful garden. So today we're going to focus on how you can help with the drought-like conditions in your garden and what plants will truly thrive. Last year, we had enough rainfall here in Florida to be considered a rainforest, but that does not mean we actually are a rainforest. Here in Florida, we do have a very distinct dry period, and that is because we are closer to a tropical environment than a temperate one. We're kind of the in-between space. And so rather than following the true 4 seasons of spring, summer, fall, and winter, we're closer to a 3-season cycle, or perhaps even a dry and a wet season like you would see closer to the equator. So from the months of March all the way through May, we are in our driest part of the year. The summer rains typically don't start until mid-June. So with that in mind, we know that this time frame we are currently planting for, we are going to be experiencing very dry growing conditions. This can actually be a benefit in certain ways. We'll talk about that later in the video. But for now, I want you to take away that there's nothing to fight against. This is a very normal pattern, so we just have to figure out how to work with it rather than against it. We are currently in a phase 2 water shortage order for the Southwest Florida Water Management District and most of the state of Florida, which includes Pinellas, where I live, as well as most of the state. That is the second most severe water shortage restriction we can be in. And we are currently at a 13-inch deficit in our rainfall and our aquifer levels when compared to the average time for this year. That's over a foot less than typical over a 30-year average. So we are definitely in extreme drought territory. Now, you may have gotten notices or seen on the news that they are saying you are only allowed to water your lawn once a week right now. And that is absolutely true. But good news for those of us not watering the lawn and watering gardens instead. We play by a whole separate set of rules. And watering food gardens is not a lawn. We are able to water as frequently as needed, as long as we're watering in certain ways. A common misconception is that if you are on well water or reclaimed water, that you are exempt from that rule and that you can water as often as you like, but that is not the case. The wells draw from the aquifer, which is what's low. So from a biological, ecological standpoint, we're actually doing more damage than the city water that they're cleaning. So if you have a well or reclaimed water, you can only water lawns once a week, but as a home gardener or even for ornamental plants, anything aside from grass, you are allowed to continue watering as much as you want. But there is a caveat. We cannot use overhead irrigation, which basically means automated timers and sprinkler systems. So if you have the little sprinklers that pop up out of the grass, that is a no-go, even if you're technically watering your vegetable garden. How we get around that legally is either using low volume irrigation, which means soaker hoses, drip hoses, anything along those lines. You are allowed to leave on an automated timer, and you're allowed to water your garden as often as you need, even once a morning, however often you think your garden needs it. But if you do not have that in place, you are not out of luck. You can still water using a hose or hand watering. So hand watering we often think of as exclusive to an actual watering can, but you can absolutely use a hose and an on-off valve. Basically what they're trying to make sure happens is that a person is physically present, looking at the plants, spending their time watering the garden. They just don't want us to waste the resource or have it land on something that doesn't matter. So as long as you are using the hose yourself, and there is an on-off switch to that hose, you can't just throw it in the garden and walk away, you are still absolutely legally able to water your garden as often as you need. I'm going to go against the grain and say that I'm not totally in love with rainwater catchment. Now hear me out. I'm not opposed to it. I think it is a great resource to catch if you have the space to throw a barrel on a downspout or something like that. But in the driest, hottest time of year, like spring that we're heading into, we don't get any rain. And because in most urban settings, in most home gardens, we're working with like maybe a 55-gallon barrel or other small storage units, there's no way for us to save up enough rainwater from our light rains over the winter months, or perhaps maybe even from summer of last year, to actually carry us through when there's no rain. And so my point is simply that it's not going to be able to provide for you in your time of need, whereas the AC does. Think about it. When have you not run your AC in spring? It's blazing hot. There's no relief from clouds or rain. Most of us are going to have the AC running round the clock. And the little drip, drip, drip on the side of your house with piping, that comes from the AC condensate, from the air cooling. Water is created, and it's a very pure water source. Typically, it just gets wasted and dripped out of your house. But I would recommend putting a barrel on it and putting that spout so that it drains into your barrel. The ACs typically, and it depends on the size of the house and a few other factors, but several gallons worth of pure water every single day. So think about that. That is a much more sustainable or replenishing resource if you're going to use this as a way to manage our driest time of year. So absolutely highly recommend this video. I'll have a link down below on how to set this up and how to use this resource, but definitely something to keep in mind during this hot, dry time of year. I wanted to make a few notes on low volume irrigation, which is that drip or soaker hose type irrigation. It can be a little costly to set up, but I think there's two really important things to highlight about why those costs are worth it in the garden if you're able to make it happen. Now, the first of which is water efficiency, what we're talking about today with drought-like conditions. When we do a slow drip system, whether it be soaker hose or drip, we are watering just the soil, so we're not wasting any on the leaves, any to evaporation, that kind of thing, and it slowly seeps into the soil. Now, I have done an entire video talking about how we can increase the absorption of our soil so that it holds onto the water longer. I'll make sure that I have that link as well down in the show notes. But when we do it slowly, we are allowing the water to be absorbed as best as we possibly can. And so drip and soaker hose irrigation really shine from this standpoint. The other huge perk or benefit to this style of irrigation is that the leaves remain dry. And that improves fungal disease and other issues in our garden like powdery mildew and that kind of thing from getting on our plants. Now, it's not going to completely prevent it, but what happens is those fungal spores spread more readily in moist conditions. And so if the leaves are wet from you watering with a watering can, we are creating an environment that is perfect for those fungal issues to thrive. And so if we can keep all of that moisture as much as possible in the soil and not on the leaves, we're eliminating a huge issue that most people experience in their vegetable gardens. At this point, you may be thinking you're left with eating cactus or growing cactus this time of year. And while you certainly can plant an edible Nepalese cactus, we're probably mostly looking for something a little bit more familiar and palatable. And so I have 3 recommendations for crops that absolutely thrive in these growing conditions. The first of which is dry beans. Now, dry beans can be any number of bush beans, sprawlers, or vines. It can be things like cowpeas or lima beans, any of those. But one of those is even more drought tolerant than all the rest. And those are the tepary beans. This is not a super well-known bean. It's not very... It isn't traded or in seed catalogs very often, but this is a really unique crop. This was grown in the arid southwestern United States, and these were grown without wells dug or any sort of irrigation. They would water these plants just enough to get the root system established and then allowed them to do their thing from there. They have an incredibly deep root system, which allows them to tap into any and all moisture regardless of the soil level, and they absolutely thrive in drought conditions. Now, this is something that you would use just like a black bean or a kidney bean, anything along those lines. You would use it as like a cooking bean. You can pick them when they're still young and use them as a substitute for green beans, but the shell is, or the pod is, quite a bit tougher. So I generally only use them as a dry bean. The second crop that I would like to highlight is okra. And okra is one that not everybody loves, although I would encourage you to try them lots of different ways. Pickled okra takes a lot of that slime and mucilage out of it. Also, baked okra chips are incredibly delicious. I do have a Heirloom Florida cookbook, which has that recipe in it. I'll have a link down below if you're interested in checking that out. But out of all of the okra, yes, they are well adapted to growing in our sandy soils with very minimal irrigation. That is why they were able to do okra at scale back before they had soaker hoses for growing food here in the South. So they're well adapted, but one, yet again, really sets itself apart, and that is Gold Coast okra. The root system is key. So this one is also a very deep and extensive root system that absolutely sets it apart in a drought-like condition, but it also helps with nematodes. Now, nematodes are something that are very common here. I have, yet again, a whole video describing that issue and how to balance that out in your garden. But nematodes are a huge issue with okra, and Gold Coast consistently does better than other okra because of that deep root system and getting past where the nematodes live. The final crop I would like to highlight is much more of a fan favorite, and I'm going to guarantee that you've heard of this before, and that is watermelon and cantaloupe or honeydew, the melon family. They can be a little bit of a pain in the butt to grow here because they are so susceptible to powdery mildew and fungal issues. And typically we experience that a lot, but with this extreme drought we're experiencing, we have the best possible scenario for growing them successfully. So now is the time to get those seeds in the ground. I still would recommend trellising if possible. The trellis further eliminates or prevents any sort of fungal issues because it improves the airflow and keeps the leaves off of the ground where moisture would potentially sit. So I really favor icebox type melons. Those are those smaller, like 5-pound watermelon instead of those giant ones, just because you can trellis them up, whether it be a fence, a cattle panel, your chain link fence, anything like that where you can get the leaf structure up off the ground. It also saves space, so it's a win-win for most of us home gardeners. Covered how to water, we covered what to plant, but the most important thing that we can do at the end of all of that is make sure that the water actually stays in the ground. Now, my personal preferred method is to basically create a lid over the garden. Think of it like those seed starting trays, right? You put those humidity domes on, it traps the moisture, keeps it in the soil. The sun functions much the same way in a garden setting. And I basically use the plants themselves as the lid to the garden. The leaves of these plants protect the soil from the sun's beating rays, and that helps the moisture to stay in the soil, much the same as mulch. Now, this garden bed here is a bunch of cool weather crops. I've got cabbage that's ready to harvest, and radishes that I'm going to be harvesting, and so soon I'm going to be taking out plants here and there, and the soil will soon be exposed. As soon as I have an open spot, I'm going to be mulching these areas to protect and preserve the soil life and retain as much moisture as possible. Now, mulch can go any number of ways. I would say that use whatever is most abundant in your area. I don't like to use any one thing. As long as we're switching things out on occasion and not using the same mulch over and over, we won't have any issues with acidity or fungal disease or things like that, as long as we're rotating through different mulches. Sometimes I use oak trees and their leaves. This is the prime time to collect those. Lots of people are raking their yards and putting it by the street. You can also look for pine needles. You can even use bedding material. I just got new baby chicks. We can use that kind of material as a mulch cover. You can also use things like chop and drop. My moringa, my chaya, those plants that just won't stop producing no matter what you do. Any of that excess vegetation and material can be laid across the soil to protect it. Now, there is one interesting, probably often overlooked mulch material that I love to put in my garden. So if you're interested in learning about more on how to use seaweed as a mulch in your garden, make sure to watch this video next.